Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to 00 Film Strip, where I, your co-host Jay, along with the guests, explore a single entry from each of the eras of James Bond. Today we are talking about The Living Daylights, featuring Timothy Dalton as James Bond 007, Miriam Diabo as Cara Melvoy, Joe Don Baker as Brad Whitaker, Huron Crabbe as General Koskov, and John Rhys Davies as General Pushkin. Directed by John Glenn of Bond fame, released in 1987, made over $191 million at the box office. And here to do this with me today, Mike from the Amateur Auteurs podcast. Mike, thanks for joining me here on this special edition of 00 Film Strip.
Yeah, Jay, thanks for having me, man. It's really exciting to be part of the Film Strip retrospective series. So I've been, I guess, as longtime listeners know, I've been listening to Film Strip for a long time, so it's really cool to be part of one of these retrospectives that I've been listening to for the better half of a decade now. So
Well, I really appreciate that and appreciate you being a part of this. And for those that may be joining somewhere in the middle of 00 Film Strip, like I said, we're doing a single entry from each era of James Bond. And then I will have all of these folks on who are guests on a big Film Strip Sessions roundtable once we are done to talk about all things Bond. But as we said, today we're doing one of the two Timothy Dalton options. And I wanted to start with you first, Mike. Like, what's your background with James Bond? What was your first James Bond movie? And then who you consider your James Bond?
yeah, that's a really funny question, and especially I think so. I'm 29. I'll be 30 later in 2025. So coming to the James Bond, it's funny enough. I don't think it was through the movies. I actually think it was through video games. So my first interaction with James Bond was through the classic Nintendo 64 GoldenEye.
Yes.
And I remember playing that a solo, playing it with friends, split screen, when the idea of like what is it, like screen looking came into play and would destroy friendships and like all the weird things that we would come up with so people wouldn't screen look. But I remember playing that as a kid, but not understanding that this was a movie. This was a video game adaptation of a movie. And I think that was like James Bond for me for a while. I remember playing the video games more. I'm thinking of like Agent Under Fire on PlayStation. I'm thinking of I think it's Nightfire on PlayStation. Everything. I think it's Everything Is Not Enough or something. Like that was like an exclusive James Bond title. And then I remember, like, as I was getting older, I realized that there were films attached to these movies, but I thought it the other way around. I thought the films were aping off the video games, and then my dad eventually was like, no, 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 it's the other way around. The game was made because of the movie, and it was because of that I started like looking into the movies and watching the movies, and I feel like I have like snapshots of the entire series, so I think that this retrospective is going to give me the end that I need to start from the beginning. Because I remember, after that, watching the films that the games were based on, like from Russia with Love. What else was GoldenEye, of course. And even like the Casino Royale games. They started making the games after the movies. So started watching the movies after that. I think I really started getting into it once Daniel Craig kind of entered the fray. I remember watching Casino Royale. So that's 2007. So I must have been like 11, 12 years old, not really understanding like the idea of James Bond and like how important this reboot was, and how, especially for the image of James Bond. I think coming off of Pierce Brosnan, what was it? World Is Not Enough.
Yeah, that was his last one. Yeah.
Where he is
Die Another Day was actually his last one. So yeah, let me repeat. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the one where he is CGI surfing a tsunami wave.
That
was kind of
I
like
think
the
that's
end of
Die
it.
Another Day. Yeah, that one's full of wacky CGI. So
Yeah, so we're like seeing that and you're like, okay, like James Bond needs a new image. So Daniel Craig, I guess, was my like throughway of like actually being interested in James Bond and like going back and watching the films with a more critical eye and also just a more fun eye and understanding who the character was. So that's my introduction and my history with James Bond. I've been slowly getting back into the movies, but I think this retrospective is going to just so I'm prepared for the round table and also I can enjoy all the episodes. But my James Bond, honestly, I still think of all those snapshots growing up, Timothy Dalton always stood out to me. And it is specifically, I'm so glad you asked me. I guess it just happenstance. You asked me to talk about Living Daylights because that's like the snapshot film that I remember the most and thinking like, oh, this is actually really interesting. And Timothy Dalton, I think he's I think he's my favorite James Bond. I guess if you were to say like generational, who's my James Bond, it would probably be Pierce Brosnan because of the GoldenEye games. And the James Bond games that he was in. So it's almost like it's not the reason you'd be expecting, but my favorite James Bond is Timothy Dalton, and we can get into that as we get into this film. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a unique character that so many people have played.
Well, and you had mentioned that as an aside once in one of our many conversations, which is why most of the folks that have been on this, I gave like this list of choice, and as things picked off, they went to it. But I went straight to you with Dalton because I remember you said you liked him, and I said, okay, we'll see if Mike goes with the kind of film Twitter revisited movie of lifetime, License to Kill, or if you go with The Living Daylights. And I'm kind of excited you went with Living Daylights because I have thoughts about License to Kill, and maybe on the roundtable we can get into those. But I remember seeing this in theaters, and the first Bond movie I saw in a movie theater was Octopussy, and then I saw View to a Kill. So I came in at the tail end of Roger Moore, and then we waited a little bit, and we got Timothy Dalton, who I didn't know from anything, but he just looked cool, and he looked like what I thought the new age James Bond should be when I was, 12 years old or whenever this came out. And they were talking about, oh, we're going kind of back, to the roots, but we're not retelling the story. We're just going to get more serious action. And growing up watching a lot of the Connery movies, I liked the kind of raw action that they had, and I felt like the Moore movies were really fun, and there's like a sense of fun to them. But Moore was never big into the big action scenes, and when he did them, it was obviously not him. We know all that, and particularly near the end there, it was clearly all stunt double E and all that. Whereas Dalton was going to be the guy that they put on the roof of the car and let him surf off of it and, do some of these kind of things, but without getting completely outlandish, And I remember seeing this in theaters and just having a really, really good time with it. And then, of course, I've watched it, several times through the years. So I'm glad you picked Living Daylights as well. And Dalton is one of those that I felt like didn't get the full due of the opportunity because they offered it to him several times. The story is they wanted him even back during like on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and he felt like he was way too young to do it. And so he passed on it, and then they offered it to him again when they were getting ready to do Live and Let Die, and he was like, "No, I'm still, not there for it." And then they thought they were going to get Pierce Brosnan for this thing, and at the last minute, the producers of Remington Steele said, "Oh, wait a minute, no, that's going to increase a lot of our popularity." And the reruns had started picking up, so they reignited the series, and the Broccoli's, wouldn't work with them on it. Like they said, "Hey, you can have him in, these days. We'll have him these days," and they said no. And so Pierce Brosnan had to wait a few years, and so they went back to Dalton, who had to pass on it again because he was in another movie. But in that time in between, that movie wrapped, and so he like literally left that set on like a Thursday or something and wound up on Bond on like Sunday. So he ran in at the last minute to get in Living Daylights, which is kind of wild. But they knew they wanted to go with this. It's more or less pieces of Bond stories, but it's more or less when they've now kind of run out of the Fleming, influence. There's, a thing or two here and there they can pull, but it's mostly, hey, we got to start writing Bond as if it's a franchise now. And so they go with their one of their staple directors, Michael Wilson, who's one of the producers and executive producers of Eon and things, actually co-wrote the screenplay with Richard Maybaum, who had written several things for them and had been a part of this. And so they were bringing in people that could get Bond, and Maybaum in particular worked on like Dr. No and all the way up through License to Kill. He'd been a part of a lot of them, so they were bringing in the production. Like Eon at that point had really established itself as to what it was going to be, and they had like a whole house of Bond, as it were. And they got Dalton in, which was a guy they had wanted for a while. They just couldn't make it work, and then they finally did. So, but like I say, I saw this in theaters. I don't think you were doing the theater thing at that point in life when this came out in theaters, but because you've already dropped your age. But I do remember this one being in heavy rotation, like on the TBS repeats, and it also made it was one of those that was a big rental, and like we said, it made almost $200 million at the box office. So it was a smash, and they spent 40 million bucks on it in 1987. That's a lot of money. That would be almost like 120 million dollars today. So it's a pretty big budget, but they made a lot of money off of it and felt like it was a launch to things. But we'll talk about maybe on the roundtable what happened with Dalton and why it didn't go past the next entry. But boy, he gets a bang right out of the gate here, I think.
Yeah, I definitely, like I said, this film just stuck with me, and I was actually looking up because I had heard like people really enjoyed Dalton as Bond, and I was looking at like Reddit posts, just forums of people, and they were saying that Dalton, he was the more serious take on it. He didn't have as much humor. Or the film suffered because it was more serious. I completely disagree. I don't know. I mean, I can't really. I know the memories I have of License to Kill is that that's definitely a little bit more serious. I think the kills are a little bit more gruesome. I remember they blow up a dude's head in in like a decompression chamber in License to Kill. And if that like sets the tone, I remember it being more like darker, but I remember
Yeah, very
Living
violent.
Daylights. Yeah,
Yeah.
Living Daylights was blending that like humor, and I even like wrote those like my favorite humorous bits down, which we'll get to as we discuss the film. But yeah, this just seemed like that perfect mix of humor and action, but also like Dalton can bring those classical like acting chops in. Um, like when one of the CIA agents gets killed and he just turns that flip and he's pissed and he's not playful anymore. He's like, "No, we're going now
Yeah.
and you're coming with me now." And
It's
yeah, I think it's a perfect vehicle for him and introduction is for Bond.
Yeah, it's the intensity of Connery without being the big brute that Connery was, and also they dial back a lot of things in this movie we'll talk about. They dial back all the gadgetry. There's one girl, they're not going to do the Bond, plowing his way through a bunch of women thing. He's not a playboy so much as he's a spy and an assassin, and he's a pretty good killing machine. And I mean, we should talk about like this is coming at the time in the 80s when the action genre, this is before Die Hard, this is before Lethal Weapon and Speed, and though Lethal Weapon's the same year as this, and they were in production at the same time, they didn't know what that was going to be. So it's before what I call the Shane Blackening of action movies happened, where we got smart with our action movies. And this is in the throes of Rambo and Schwarzenegger and Chuck Norris and Golden Globus and all that stuff. So you've got all of that, and then you put out the smart version of that quote with the Bond movie, and it's certainly a mood, and we'll get into it as we go. So I'm going to do our 30,000 foot plot summary. We'll get into all the stuff as we go through our formula here. But James Bond in this iteration is tasked with assisting for the defection of a Soviet general, Koskov. However, he suspects foul play is going on because the defection goes very awry. Bond delves deeper and he uncovers a dangerous conspiracy involving a rogue KGB general named Pushkin, whom he knows, and a ruthless arms dealer played by Joe Don Baker, Brad Whitaker. Bond's investigation leads him to Vienna, where he tracks down the beautiful cellist Kara Milvoy, who's entangled in this plot because she's Koskov's girlfriend, but she also was trying to shoot him. They thought at the beginning, but he discovers it was all blank. She was just there's part of the ruse. They end up discovering, though, that it's Koskov and Whitaker who are behind all of this stuff, that they're really the bad guys. They're involved in an opiate trade from Afghanistan so they can fund more of the arms dealing because with the Cold War coming to a close and near the end, there's a lot of stuff drying up. There's a lot of upheaval. Whitaker needs some fast cash to be able to make it work, and Koskov is his way of making that happen. And so that ends up, running them into Afghanistan, and they realize Pushkin is just being used as a way to get these Western spies to ignore what's happening so they can run the scam. Bond and Kara join forces with the Mujahideen, very similar to Rambo 3, to help thwart Koskov
Yeah.
and Whitaker's opium export. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Uh,
Yep.
he's able to destroy the plane carrying the drugs, but Koskov escapes. Bond then invades Whitaker's heavily armed compound, and he gets into a shootout with Whitaker, ultimately killing him in Tangiers. And right before Koskov and his men can jump in, Pushkin and company throw in, save Bond, and they take Koskov into custody with the orders to kill him before he gets back to Moscow. So, he's dead meat. And then, Bond goes and watches Kara perform in Vienna at the orchestra again and meets her backstage for a little romance at the end, as James Bond does. So let's go through this with our kind of formula and setup. Let's talk about that setup and cold open. Every time we introduce a Bond, I think it's always fun. And we've got the double O's on the Rock of Gibraltar with SAS to do this, kind of spy games mission thing. And in the middle of it, of course, there's a traitor who kills one of the double O's, 004 as it were, and starts planning this idea that like death to all spies is back on for the Soviet Union. It's all part of this ruse. But the way we introduce Dalton, where he spins around and he's got his hair blowing in the wind and stuff, and he chases down that assailant and runs him off the cliff, and then ends up landing on that boat, with the beautiful girl. Before we go into the song, I thought it was a great opening action scene, man. It puts you right into it and sets the tone for this movie.
Yeah, it's and the opening action. There's I don't know if I've mentioned it with you, but there's a channel called Corridor Digital, and it's a lot of VFX artists, and they do different content. But one of them is they have a series called Stuntmen React, and they react to James Bond stunts. And I think they've had a few videos, but they did they looked at the effects of what they did in the stunt work of this opening sequence, and the amount of different techniques that they utilized is nothing short of incredible. I mean, even so much as, I mean, like you said earlier, Timothy Dalton is doing these stunts. Like they have him strapped to the top of this truck, even like the wide shots, it's him. Um, and they insert, a few like clearly sound stage of him like almost falling off, but it's blended so seamlessly using miniatures, using composite shots. Like even for the stuff, like I remember when the at the very end of this, when James Bond ignites his reserve parachute to get out of the airborne Jeep as it's plummeting into the ocean. Um, there's like this pan out shot of the truck, and it pans to his feet. It's like a 2-second shot, but the amount of work that went into something like that, using a miniature, mounting the camera, framing it, you can just feel the energy of this action, and it's throwing you into it. I really think it encapsulates like the confusion of what's going on, because this is supposed to be a like war games training scenario,
Yeah.
and how suddenly agents are getting killed, and even the guards don't eat, like they're shooting paintballs at, like, oh, you're dead. What do you, wait, you're supposed to be dead. But shot in the chest. And
Yeah.
so it adds like the audience is also experiencing that confusion with James Bond of like, whoa, 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 like, this is escalated. This went from 0 to 1,000 in the span of like 5 seconds. Like, what's happening? So yeah, this opening action really, I think, sets the tone for what
Hmm.
this film is going to be, what kind of Bond Dalton's going to be. But they still throw in that that quintessential humor at the end,
The
where he's like,
quip.
"Oh, yep, she'll
Mhm.
call you back. I'll report in an hour. Oh, you don't wanna celebrate with me? Make it two." And then X perfect editing
Mhm.
of just right into the opening theme. But that's where I was like, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting a quip like that. I was expecting like, oh, I'm James Bond, the classic line. But nope,
Hmm.
I'll report in an hour. Make it two. Cut. And it's so again, it blends
Hmm.
well, I don't want to say the humor. We just get that quip at the end, but it really is kind of showing you what film you're about to get. You're going to get a quippy James Bond that's not like overtly, trying to be funny, although sometimes it does feel like he's actually trying to be funny. Um, but then you get this like really awesome action that I don't know if we've really seen before in these James Bond films. Like this feels like Living Daylights is walking, so Casino Royale in 2007 could run.
Well, And this is the old version of me knowing, like, if you go back and watch some of those early Connery ones, this is exactly how they started. Like it's a big action scene, and
Hmm.
sometimes the Moore ones would play it down a little bit as he got older and as the scripts got a little sillier and stuff like that. And that's no fault. That was the direction of the times, man. Late 70s, early 80s. That's what we did. I'm glad you called out the cinematographer here. Alec Mills is the cinematographer, and he had worked as camera operator and second unit and all that kind of stuff on several of these movies, going back to on Her Majesty's Secret Service, which has some incredible action sequences in it. So he knows how to shoot this stuff, and we're still at a time when everything is a practical effect. It's models, it's all that kind of stuff, and they're doing a heck of a job with it. Even on the rear projection screen stuff, like you can tell, like they're putting a lot of work to make this look good and to give us a good jolt of energy here. And I'm glad you called out that smash cut right into the opening sequence. Another great opening sequence. And I love the titles here. And I got to tell you, this is a change in song too, because we've kind of gone soft rock for a long time in the Bond movies, and then bringing in Aha, which is the not Duran Duran, but pretty much Duran Duran. But after we've come off of View to a Kill, which is a banger song. I love this song, man. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like the song and the title sequences go really well together here.
I think one of the questions I'm going to ask in the round table, and maybe if it's already a question that you have, is just ask the group like, what makes a good Bond song?
Oh yeah, we'll be
What?
talking about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, duh. I mean, that's like
Mhm.
I feel like the people that love Bond, this is like this could be its episode in and of itself. Yeah, I do really like the song initially because it's been so long since I've seen the film, and initially I was like, is this David Bowie? And then I looked it up, like, oh, it's Aha. It is a catchy song. I mean, I still think my favorite songs are Live and Let Die and Skyfall. And I think I think there are some themes of like the two why I really like it. But we'll save those thoughts for the round table. But no, I did really enjoy. I always love the opening themes of James Bond movies and just like what they do because it's always so flashy. It's always like kind of representative of the time, I would say. Um, and yeah, it's a nice time capsule of like
Mhm.
when this film was made. So yeah, I know I'm digging
Mhm.
it. It's setting me up to get into the mood and be in like the spy mystery.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, they had two songs. They had the Pretenders doing "If There Was a Man," which becomes the love theme for the movie. And a lot of times they had gone with that, but because of "View to a Kill" had been such a hit as a song, they were like, we need to stay on this kind of pop wave thing. And so they went with the Norwegian, Duran Duran. They went with Aha. And I'm not a huge Aha fan, but I like the song and I like some of their work. And I feel like it still fits that vein because we're in that changeover through the '80s. I mean, they're not going to go get Winger or Motley Crue to do a Bond song. So, they got to keep it somewhat, top 40 and being Brits, they're going to do it a certain way. And so I love that. I love the sequence. And I'm with you. The title sequence is snappy. It's fun. It's got all the stuff. You got the girls with the guns and you've got Dalton kind of, his visage kind of swinging around and doing stuff. You want to introduce people to this new guy. And the thing that I keep coming back to in this is going to be a Bond that's about action, about immediate action. He's not going to talk about it a lot. He's not going to think about it a lot. He's going to move, and he's pretty intense. And they're capitalizing on the fact that hey, we cast an intense actor to do this, and so we should have an intense sequence for that. And no, I'm with you. I love all of that. I think it makes it for a lot of fun. The case file in this one is interesting because we're at the end of the Cold War here. And we got all this deception, and we got arms dealers, which would have been in the news at the time. We've got shifting politics. We both kind of laughed about the Mujahideen, um, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, we'll
uh,
get to Mujahideen. Don't you worry
tie
about
in. Yeah,
that.
well, I mean, let's talk about it now because it's how all this stuff goes down. What did you make of the overall plot? The idea of this general trying to defect, and he's ratting on this other general who's actually not the bad guy anymore, and you've got all these shifting politics going around. It's an interesting time for Bond and for Western spies to be against the old Cold War enemies here in the Soviet Union.
It's definitely a product of its time. I was getting maybe not. I feel like the quintessential like 80s like Russian Cold War movie is Rocky 4. So I don't think we're like quite there, but this is more, I feel like the quote unquote smarter take on that, where Rocky 4 is just like blatant propaganda. I feel like I really appreciate the shifting politics here. Like you don't really know what's happening throughout, like who, like what alliances are. Like you just know that James Bond is the good guy. But even like from the beginning, when this Russian general Koskov is trying to defect, immediately I'm like, something's off about this guy. Like this is not
It's
like clear cut. Like he's like overjoyed to see James Bond, which at first I'm like, well, yeah, he's trying to escape. He's
mhm.
defecting. But then I was like, he's a little like too happy to see him.
When
And
they're at the
then
farm, it's like he's putting on a way bigger show than he
yeah,
needs
he's
to.
hamming it
And
up.
that's
And I'm
Euron
like,
Krebe too. I mean, whatever note they gave him, he just went to 11 with it. So the opening is what's cool though, because they're at the opera, they know or the orchestra, they know there's going to be a hit on this guy when he makes his move, and then Bond, laser scopes in because he's got the cool guns and all this stuff, and he sees that the would-be assassin is a woman, and of course Bond being Bond, like we said, he's not going to go through the supermodel ranks so much, but he sees her and he shoots the gun instead of her, and we think immediately like, oh, it's just because of another pretty face. But he knows this doesn't look like somebody that knows how to shoot a gun. Like the way she's holding it isn't right, and when he ultimately gets that gun later, he realizes like this is a total setup. She's part of the ploy, and that's why he doesn't trust Koskov anyway, and this just leads him to more distrust of Koskov. And I don't know, I kind of like the way that played. Like we get to see Bond be a detective again,
yeah,
which is sort of neat.
yeah, he's playing, he's being coy, and he's using his charisma. He's just like, I'm gonna omit facts. I'm gonna be a spy, and he's being intelligent about it. And I do like that, his own reputation of like, oh, you didn't shoot the woman, and he has a pretty face, and he's like, no, like something doesn't. Well, he like, oh wait, and like that's what Timothy Dalton does real well. He's always has these coy smiles where he's like, yeah, that's part of it, but when he says, I trust my instincts, I don't just, blindly follow orders, and people are like, nah, like they kind of write it off as, nah, you can't shoot a pretty face. But no, there's something tickling his spy brain. That's this, like something's weird here. And, yeah, like you said, we get to see him be a detective. We see him be coy. We see him investigate and, not never show his hand. And I really dig that. I love like the whole sequencing here of just watching Bond be a detective. Yeah, I think you said it perfectly there.
Well, that and the more he delves into it and things, and when he realizes what's really going on here, and we'll talk about the characters as we get into him here in a minute, but just as the plot unfolds and stuff, the way he uncovers the deception and figures it out, and as we've seen for a while with MI6 and the way they operate with Bond is they'll say stuff like, well, we need somebody that follows orders, doesn't just trust instincts, but they clearly trust his instincts. They're just trying to goad him into like focus, like do your stuff, Batman, and that's pretty much what he does. And I love how he figures it out. I mean, part of it is the way that raid happens on the farm, and we'll talk about the henchman Necros in a little bit. But he knows something's not right about this. Like this is way too easy. Like because his boss is like, we got egg all over our face for this man. Like, how do we let this happen? And he's like, because it was a setup, bruh. Like he knows. He's like, this is not. That was exactly what was supposed to happen. So Bond knows, and I love when Bond is smarter than everybody in the room, but he's not like a jerk about it. He's just like, let me show you. And he just lays it out and he goes and proves it, and I don't know. I found that to be just fascinating as it goes through. And then, I don't know. Like I say, it's definitely a dated plot because of some of the things that happen and who he teams with and all that stuff. But setting that aside, it totally makes sense that James Bond would go like, well, how am I going to fight against rogue Soviets? I need to get the people that are the biggest thorns in their side, and that's the guerrillas fighters of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who gave the Soviets so much hell the Soviets just left. And I mean, that's reality. That's kind of
Yep.
smart.
And that, yeah, well, and that's where it's like product of the 80s, because I'm like, ooh, like in the modern lens of, 2024, 2025, I'm like, Mujahideen then became America's biggest thorn.
Yep.
And I think that's putting it lightly in the formation of the Taliban. And it's funny too, because I remember like in high school, and one of the classes I was taking, we were like kind of focusing on kind of like where we are now with like the conflict in the Middle East. And when my teacher was talking about like the Mujahideen, the freedom fighters, uh, my mind went back to this sequence of James Bond. I'm like, pretty sure James Bond was fighting with the Mujahideen. Like that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, him and
And again,
Rambo in Rambo 3 have that
yep,
distinction of having fought
yep,
with the future of the Taliban, you know.
yeah, and
But
it's
politics
crazy.
shift, you know, as we know, politics shift a lot, and today's friend is tomorrow's enemy is to the next day's friend, you know. So it's wild how that works. But even aside of that, just as a plot point, it totally makes sense as to
Oh
how they
yeah,
team up, how they work, and that would be the way to go against them. And if you know anything, you know, about history at the time and stuff, the problem for the Soviet Union was they were falling apart financially, politically, militarily, and they were trying to fight all these fronts, and they had no way of funding it, keeping it going, and they had disillusionment amongst the troops. It also sounds like things going on today, you know, as we look at it, but just on a different front. But it makes sense for James Bond to tap into that and be a part of it. It was very contemporary at the time, and Bond films have always brought something to the Western audience that maybe you weren't entirely aware of, unless you just hung on every word that Tom Brokaw said, you know, on the
hmm
news at the time. We're past Uncle Walter at this point, so news has become a different thing, and people maybe they wouldn't have known this, but you know what they did know about? They knew about arms dealers. They knew Ollie North. They knew all that stuff was going on, and they also knew that there was a huge opioid trade coming out of the Middle East. And so those would have been things that an audience could respond to. And so I give this movie credit for being kind of bold with that, because Bond movies don't always get complicated with their politics. They don't want to, you know,
yeah,
they just want to set up a villain and then you go and do the villain thing. And they vacillate between like cartoon villain and like real world that could happen villain. And, this one does a good job of sort of blending in the real world stuff with some cartoony things, I think.
yeah, no, and I do think it, like you said, I think bold's a good word of like using like history that is actually happening and infuse it
Complicated
into
history, yeah.
yeah, complicated history, complex into this like James Bond film. Then and I was getting a lot of like Indiana Jones. Like when it works,
Mm,
it's because you're getting this like tons of cultures, you're getting tons of like kind of infusing real life history into this fantasy, basically.
totally.
This fantasy dream, like that people want to live.
Hmm.
It's like kind of that classic, like, oh, if I want to be a spy because I want to be James Bond. And I'm sure they
Hmm.
spies today in the CIA, they probably say like this isn't James Bond shit. Like don't
Yeah,
um
yeah. I think they even tell people like you will not be doing these kind of things. It's very,
yeah, like you
yeah,
will not operate like
yeah.
that.
Spy
But
work
it's the fantasy.
is much more boring than people think. So, but than movies would lead you to believe. But let's talk about our Bond girl this time, because we get we get the girl on the boat, but you might as well just forget
Yeah.
her. She's not. It's the singular girl again. We've done this a few times with Bond, where we've centered him down with one person. You know, they did this with Her Majesty's Secret Service. They did it a couple times with Roger Moore. And I like Miriam Diabo. I like Kara because she's complicated. You know, she thinks she's in love with this Russian general, and he's promising her all this stuff because I'm sure he's winding her and dined her with all of his, you know, arms trading money and stuff like that he's got going on. Mhm.
Yeah, I like Kara as a character. I really like how involved she is. Like, actually has a purpose in this film. I feel like some Bond girls are just kind of there, and they're just there as like to experience and to put and to give James Bond a like someone to rescue.
Yeah, arm
Like they're just a
candy.
damsel. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, arm candy, a damsel. But here she actually feels like a fleshed out character, and that
Hmm.
when she realizes that she's being duped, she immediately like, oh, like, oh, I see her eyes are opened and she actually has agency to help James Bond. And I love that moment when she's with the Mujahideen says and James Bond is in the truck of opium, and she says, well, what are you gonna do? And they're like,
Hmm.
well, there's nothing we really can do. And she grabs an AK and rides straight into the fray. And I love that line of women, and then they all just follow her and like ignites it. I love the agency that she has. She
Yeah.
doesn't feel like she doesn't feel like a blonde bimbo. She just feels like
No.
someone that's caught in the crossfire. And then because of James Bond, she finds her voice and is able to fight back in a in a not what's the word? It's not a condescending way. It doesn't feel like it's
Hmm.
patronizing. Like it feels like this is what this character would do. I mean, she's from, she's in West Germany and in Soviet occupied Soviet Russia, and
Hmm.
she's like, nope, I'm fighting back now. I'm like now a rebel. I'm fighting back this oppressive system. And I really appreciate that. It feels like she has something to do and she has the agency to do something in this movie.
Yeah, I think you make a great point in the fact that she's got so much agency on her own and that she's willing to pick up arms and do it herself. I think that's what's neat about her. And again, it's a fun characterization, and they don't lean so heavy into the I don't know. I didn't feel like they leaned too heavy into the romance side of it because that's always part of these movies, and that's fine because it should be. It's part of the adventure story, but it's not in detriment to her also being like a pivotal part of the action. Like you said, she's not a damsel in distress. She's actually part of things, and it would be a template. They've done this before with Bond girls and his sidekicks and stuff like that, and they'll do it again in this series. The series gets a lot of flack in some modern parlance about like, oh, the way it treats women and stuff like that, and some of that's fair, but it's also done a whole lot for female characters in action movies, and I feel like it's on the forefront of a lot of stuff here. What about our villains though, man? We talked about Koskov and the way Euron Crabbe is just camping that up heavy, and then to only be topped by Jodan Baker as Whitaker the arms dealer. Like, he'll make another appearance in this series a few years later as one of the good guys, but this is wild, man. Like, he is on a tear because Jodan Baker started out playing one of the most famous or infamous Southern lawmen ever, Buford Pusser. If you've never seen the original Walking Tall, I recommend it because it's
Hmm.
more or less what that guy's life was like. But he was playing that, and then he started playing heavies. He started playing the bad guy, and so this is in his run of his bad guy era, I call it. And I don't know, man. I think the two of them, they're supposed to be so serious and scary, but man, I just laugh both the time they're
Oh
on the
yeah.
screen. They're hilarious.
Oh, they're hamming it. My favorite detail is like is his room of
His room of war.
generals and of
Yeah.
war memorabilia. But I love the detail. At least to me, all of the generals look exactly like him. Like he's
Yes.
modeled himself after all these people. Like even like Genghis Khan. I'm like, that's clearly a white guy, like a white person mannequin that you just slapped some stuff on. And
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, I love those details of like this guy that's obsessed with war but got kicked out of West Point for cheating and like, stolen valor, it seems. Like he went into arms dealing to kind of get back at the system that he couldn't be a part of. And he's
Hmm.
restructuring how he got kicked out, like his failure as like, well, I did that on purpose. I did the military's too structured for me and too barbaric arms deals. This is like the true brunt of warfare. Like he's just so full of it and full of himself. And
Yeah.
and yeah, he's such a like cartoonish villain but it works. He plays it so well, and I think it's surrounding with these details of, like I said, like the Hall of Warriors, and it's all just him in like cosplaying as Napoleon, as Genghis Khan, as this general, as
Yes.
Alexander the Great. Like I really appreciate those details. That I would expect nothing less from a Bond villain. So
Oh yeah, completely. And again, between him and Koskov, and then we should talk about Pushkin in this too, even though he's played up as a villain, but he's not really a villain. I love John Rhys Davies and things. I still find him funny, and I love how it's very sly the way they play it. Like, you don't know whose side he's on. It's really to the end. You wonder if he's just part of it too. And I don't know, man. I mean, if you're gonna have such serious sort of overtones about modern, at the time, modern politics and all the complicated stuff and all that, I think it's neat to have a villain that's just clearly like they're just manipulators, they're just trying to make a buck, and there's something funny about that. I don't know, I dug it. I thought it was neat and was a neat twist on the villains. And then, not to be topped by Necros the henchman, who a lot of people will recognize as Tony from Die Hard a couple years later, the
mhm.
Mr. I'm gonna wear the ho 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 I have a shotgun sweatshirt after John McClane kills him. But I love this dude, man. He's like the perfect Aryan specimen. He's cut, he's ripped. He does a whole swimming routine. And all I could think, I was like, well, I'm glad I had the ex-collegiate swimmer on here to talk about the other obvious. I mean, I think he was a dancer, so I mean, he's just a built dude. And I love his best scene is the raid where they get Koskov out of the farm and he's the milkman with the exploding milk bottles. I love this dude. He's exactly what you think of a Bond henchman to be.
Yeah, and I love it's just like again, product of the 80s. Like all your henchmen have to have like some fit like recognizable thing. And his is the or at least at the beginning of the film, it's the Walkman and how that's like his
Yes,
weapon that
yes.
he kills people with. And And I even love in the beginning when he's running and there's all damn Yanks. Like, who's this guy? Like, he's like purposely like trying to distract the milkman. So he runs into him. And I'm like, oh, is like the CIA here? Like, how is this going to come in? And then, and then it just extrapolates. But I was going with that, like, oh, it's a damn Yank. But then, or like, I was like, oh, is the CIA trying to extradite the dude that the British just got? Like, how's this? But then you find out, oh no, he's still part of this big conspiracy and this big plot. But no, he's awesome. Yeah, I definitely see the dancer vibes, like with that fight with the agent in the kitchen.
Oh yeah,
Like
that's a great fight.
He's throwing kicks left to right. It feels like it has meat. While it doesn't have the kinetic energy of like the modern Bonds with like Daniel Craig, it does. It's not Roger Moore. It's
No.
not like it's not kicking someone in the butt and like clearly throwing punches that are not connecting. Like
No.
the sound design is perfect here. And the staging is great too. It just feels so like visceral and violent. He's shoving a guy's face in the on the grill. He's
Well, he's hitting
throwing
with a
these milk
frying
bombs.
pan.
Yeah, you're like,
Yeah.
damn, this is rough. Yeah, no, he's very intimidating. He just looks
Mhm.
like that specimen of a killing machine. He looks like a Terminator,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, he really could have played one. Honestly, you could see him being like in T2 or something. If Robert Patrick wasn't around, he would have been a good second for that. I love
Hmm.
how organic the fight is. They're just using everything around them. Once the
Hmm.
guns get kicked free, then it's well his he doesn't even have one, so he's got to use everything else around him. He gets the agent's gun away, and then again, like you say, he's putting his face on the grill. He's hitting him with frying pans, throwing him up against the wall, and ultimately he kills him with that frying pan. And then I love how he's able to like manipulate voices, too.
Hmm.
Like he's a mimic. I'm like, that's kind of cool. I don't know if he had a gadget for that. It almost looked like he did at one point, but I don't think they really play with that. I don't know. I thought it was neat, and I love the exploding milk bombs. That's one of the like known gadgets of the movie. They have Bond gets the key ring that'll stun gas somebody or it'll blow open a safe. Just if he whistles right or whatever. I love that, and the big one though, man, is they bring back the Aston Martin. It's
Hmm.
the V8. It's got lasers on it now, so it cuts a car in half, which is it's kind of funny, but also like sort of cool. And yeah, it's freaking lasers. That's the 80s, right? That's what we're gonna do. But it's got all the other stuff too. I loved it. I love the fact that they give Q a good scene with it, but and he's got like all the goofy gadgets, but Bond's not gonna play with those. He's gonna get the two that really work. And I love the car in this movie more than anything.
Yeah, the car. It's a shame that it gets destroyed so quickly.
But
Because
that's
I
the
was hoping
joke, right? Is that Bond
yeah,
wrecks these cars.
well, I love where he's like, watch the Aston Martin. It just got a new fresh coat of paint. I'm like, oh, that car is blowing up at some point in this
Yeah, that
film.
car's dead meat. Like you immediately know it's a dead meat car at that point.
Yeah, and that it's so funny. I feel like once the Aston Martin gets destroyed, like that, like the sequence is fun, but then when they're riding down on the cello, I was like, what do you mean this film isn't funny? They're
It's
riding
hilarious.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like they're riding. He's used, and the whole time he's like, oh, the damn cello. Forget the damn cello.
Yeah,
The
they're skiing with the
Stradivarius.
cello. Yeah.
Yeah, he's using it as like a rudder while they're
Hmm.
and then when they go under the border, they throw it over, catch it. It's like we have nothing to declare except the cello. I'm like, this movie's
I mean,
hilarious. Like it's so self-aware of like, okay, this is ridiculous, but
I don't know much about classical instruments like their durability, but that cello takes a beating, dude. Like it gets a
it's
bullet
shot.
in it. She's still playing it at the end. So I'm like, man, that thing must be made out of steel underneath or something. But I love that joke though. I'm with you. It's like even though this Bond is serious and he's intense and it's more action and stuff, we're still having fun. We're gonna have a fun sequence where they're skiing in a cello case. Why
Yeah,
not? It's
we're
it's
not in Casino Royale yet.
no, we're
We're
not
not
doing
quite
that
there.
yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're not the
yeah.
revamped James Bond. We're not Spectre. We're not Skyfall. We are
Mhm.
serious, but also not taking ourselves too seriously.
And
So
again,
yeah,
it's the
no,
it's the times, like the Chuck Norris, the Rambo, the Golden Globes movies would have something like this. So that's what people want. We got to give them that. So I love that. It's a lot of fun. We talked a little bit about the travelogue and some of it. There's not a ton of it. Gibraltar's kind of a neat opening. They do a lot of Czechoslovakia and Vienna back and forth before we get to Afghanistan in the desert. But I love these scenes where they're crossing the borders. We go from mountains and snow and stuff, and then we get down into the desert. And I felt like they did a good job of staging that at Pinewood and making a lot of that work while also getting a lot of good second unit stuff. I dig the places Bond has to go and the fact that he's not everywhere. He's not all over the place in this movie. It's really three or four places he's got to go, and then the big compound that's supposed to be in Tangiers is kind of neat too.
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate that we are staying into like central locations. For example, this is like a random connection. It's more so like the traveling. I remember in the film, in well, the Star Wars film Rogue One, where we were traveling from planet to planet to planet, and like even somewhere like you're on there for 5 minutes, a 5 minute scene, and then you never go back to the planet. And I feel like if James Bond is just traveling from location to location to location, like you're losing a sense of identity. You are kind of confused. You're not able to appreciate the setting that we're in. So I really like I love like the opening shot of Gibraltar. Like we see the island where this base is on. We go up into the cold mountains in like of Soviet controlled areas. Then we go into Afghanistan. It's like we're getting like the swings of extremes in temperature, but you also like appreciate the setting that you're in. And I think we linger just long enough in one location. It's like, okay, now that we need a change of scenery, moving on to the next place. Hang out here. All right, need a change of scenery, on to the next one. But there's so much going on in between each segment, each setting. Infusing different components of each setting. Like each location is important and adds its own spice to the story. So I appreciate the minimal traveling, but because we get to just explore these areas more thoroughly.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. I'm with you when sometimes the travel log becomes so much that it's hard to keep up with what's happening. I get whiplash from all this stuff. I think it's more fun when we centralize things and that it's in service of the plot in some way. And so that's what makes this fun. And then we need to talk about that big finale, man, that chase on the plane and stuff and defusing the bomb and then deciding to drop it out and have the Mujahideen blow up a bridge and we're going to blow up the plane with Koskov in it, but he gets away. I think I love all that sequence and I love that we think at this point like this would be in a lesser movie where the bad guy goes like, "Yikes!" as the bomb's about to blow the plane up, when they're crashing. But nope, he gets away, and that lets me know like, oh, there's more to come. Maybe this guy's slicker than we thought, even though he's been kind of a goofball. Koskov's actually pretty slick. I love that whole sequence with the plane and the bomb and everything else. I think that's really really good James Bond stuff.
Well, when they're like hanging off the back of the plane in the netting,
Yeah, eat
like
your heart
that
out,
is
Tom Cruise.
incredible stunt work. Like I can see where I bet Christopher Nolan watched that before The Dark Knight Rises and was like, I gotta top that. Like incredible what they do with, guys are barely hanging on. Doesn't look like they got parachutes on. The actors that is, or the stunt performers. Like it is a perfect way to end this film. Like it feels so like it feels dangerous because it is dangerous, and that's where I think like I think a lot of people are going to say like this is why there's a nostalgia for practical effects because you feel that danger. If they shot that on a CGI screen, I think CGI is getting to the point that it's starting to blur the realities of what's real and what's not if done correctly and with the right resources. But here it's like, nah, it's almost like it's reminding me of like Point Break when oh God, why am I blanking on?
Talking about Patrick Swayze and
Yeah, why did
yeah.
I think? Yeah, yeah, I'll go from there. When Patrick Swayze, when they are skydiving, and
Mm-hmm.
those sequences, like they didn't have the budget to shoot that, or they were saying like insurance won't sign off on this. But Patrick Swayze was already he was already certified to do these, so he got the stunt coordinator said, "Bring your camera, and we're just going to do a day of skydiving." And you feel that
Mm-hmm.
visceralness. You feel that the reality of the situation because they're doing it, and I think this sequence again is that blurring of soundstage, practical, and having our actors included in the danger.
Well, and I made fun of the Tom Cruise thing a minute ago, but the one thing I'll give those latter Mission Impossible movies is there's a ton of practicality. And I mean, and that's because
Oh
Cruise
yeah.
wants it that way. And so I love that. I love it too. And I like that it comes down to a mano a mano with Bond versus Whitaker inside of his little, compound war room and stuff. And he ultimately, shoots that big Genghis Khan statue on top of him to kill him. And I like that it came down to something like that.
Hmm.
I really dug it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a fun, high octane way to end this film that is because it's building the tension, like the political tensions, and it
Hmm.
feels definitely, I mean, outside of like the action, it feels like a plot like this could kind of happen. maybe in like a less convoluted way. But then it's
Yeah.
like, no, we got to end with this like bombastic, huge set piece of a plane flying, and it was a perfect way. It was a very memorable way to end this movie.
And then to come down again to this guy's skill against another guy who thinks he's on the
Hmm.
same level, but he's really not.
Yeah,
But even
exactly.
even in that, Bond is getting ready to get shot right there before Pushkin saves him, and that's
Yeah.
that's when it all reels out and stuff. And of course, as we talked about, he in the plot summary, he goes and sees Kara, and they're kind of having their thing at the orchestra again, and again that cello took a beating, and it still sounds awesome. So
Yeah.
good work. I don't know if she actually plays the cello or not, but it's really good mimicry. If it's not, it's good work. You can always spot like the fake musician, and then you can spot
Oh
the
yeah.
actor that figured out how to do it or knows how to do it. So I love that we get the Will Return in, and it's been kind of a running joke in this series of like, is this actually the next movie? But it was. They were going to go to License to Kill next. They already had the script ready to go, and they'll turn around and do that in a couple of years here. But that brings us to final thoughts on this, Mike. And we both have been pretty positive on this. But what are your final thoughts on The Living Daylights, and where would you kind of stack it up for somebody that's curious about Bond and maybe hasn't revisited this one in a while?
Yeah, I mean, Living Daylights is definitely one of my favorite James Bond movies. Even like before I rewatched this, it was definitely like snapshots, but the snapshots were more cohesive and more like there was more to this film that I remembered than like in the past ones. So I think this is a good throughway because the I always for a modern audience, excuse me, for a modern audience, I feel like I would say watch Casino Royale, just because we're used to that kind of like stylized violence and action, but also a really good story. But if you want to check out the quote unquote older James Bonds, maybe start with I always think of like From Russia with Love or Living Daylights, because I think you're gonna get the blend of everything. You're gonna get a
It's a good
very
comp.
balanced, yeah, you're gonna get
Mhm.
a balanced James Bond who's not like overly edgy, but also like not like a caricature of what our idea of him is, of this like badass super spy. I think Living Daylights especially really balances like the quips and the humors with that intensity that Dalton can bring, just with like the slight like even just like of his face and the facial acting. I think that alone he brings like amount like so much to this role. And I think it's a very unique, intriguing mystery that we're finding out organically along the way. Not only I think what's so smart about this is because James Bond, obviously he knows everything going on, and I think why it's so effective when he tells us what's happening. Like you said it perfectly. Like he's the smartest guy in the room, but he's not a dick about it. Like when he's explaining to the characters, I almost want him to look like break the fourth wall and be like, this is what's going on in this movie right now, and like it's okay, like I'm here to help you figure this out. And it just feels so much more engaging because of that. And I think it's because of what Dalton brings to it and the writing, because if this was given to the wrong actor, it could have come off as really smug and you know no like he's a know-it-all, and it just wouldn't have worked. So I definitely really enjoyed Living Daylights. My letterbox rating is a 4 out of 5 stars. I just think and I'm curious to see how that changes once I start revisiting all the Bond films, because I'm kind of outside of the newer iteration of Bond. This is kind of my first go revisit back into the series. So I'm curious how that will change once I have the entire repertoire under my belt. But I still think it's going to change. Living Daylights is a solid James Bond film, and I think it's a good reintroduction or introduction to the series if they're unfamiliar with it, if they're like, it's been quite a while since I've seen, this property, this IP. Like, where should I start? I think this is a perfect throughway to get back into James Bond.
Mike, I couldn't say it better myself, man. I agree with all of that. It's a 4 out of 5 for me too. I think it's a really strong entry and a fun one. And again, it may be one that people haven't thought about in a while, but it's got everything you want. And I think you made a great comparison with From Russia with Love. We have the kind of singular, love interest, but also somebody who can hold her own in Tatiana. You've got all the intrigue of the, who's on whose side and what's going on. You got a great henchman who's trying to kill Bond. He's a physical specimen. These movies have a lot in common, more than you would think. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's a good one, and it's been a lot of fun talking about it with you here on this special edition of Film Strip that we're calling Double O Film Strip. Tell folks about Amateur Tours, how they can follow you and the show, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, Amateur Auteurs available on all streaming platforms. I think mostly Spotify and iTunes, SoundCloud. Taking a little bit of a hiatus, just life, different. I've multiple jobs in my profession. Getting married next year, so gotta pick up a little bit more to pay for that. But yeah, no, it's still something really fun. I have an idea for another podcast that I might want to start, but I feel like Jay, you can attest. Like we always got ideas for podcasts, so it's just a matter of creating the content. But if that comes to fruition, I'll pass it off to Jay. We'll get that all out there. But yeah, Amateur Tours, Spotify, uh, iTunes, SoundCloud. I think it's really anywhere. We do have a Twitter. Don't really use it. It's how I just communicate with podcasters. But it is Amateur Tours Pod or something like that. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys. And Jay, as always, it's always a pleasure having on and discussing all types of movies.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Mike. We'll link all of that in the show description. And folks, thanks for listening to this special edition of Double O Film Strip. You can follow the show everywhere on social media at Film Strip Pod, and we are available everywhere you can find podcasts. So until next time, thank you for listening to Double O Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.